Hello, how's everybody doing? So, chapter 13, sorry, not 13, chapter 12. What am I doing? Chapter 12, Introduction to Psychological Skills Training. That's what this video is dedicated to. I wanted to mix things up a little bit with this video. I feel like going through some of these PowerPoints can be pretty boring for you all. And so this chapter and chapter 15, I want to just talk to you and give you my thoughts on the chapter. I'm going to go through exactly what the chapter is saying, but I'm going to put it in my words rather than show you a boring PowerPoint. Some of these PowerPoints have a lot of great information, but it's a regurgitation of the chapter. And so I wanted to mix it up a little bit. If you don't like it, let me know. Then I can continue on this path of just kind of paraphrasing and giving you my words. Or if you want me to go back to the old way of giving you the PowerPoints that are within the modules, let me know as well. We can do that. And so with this chapter, I'm going to have you do a discussion board based off of this video that you see here on the screen. It's just a YouTube video. It's how long? 18 minutes long. And it's of a sports psychologist or a mental performance coach who's talking about mental skills and mental strategies. One avenue that we've learned about in this class of how you can be a professional in this field is by going into the application of sports psychology. This man, Jonathan Fader, Dr. Fader, is one of those individuals. So he works with businesses. I think he works with the New York Giants football team and probably other athletic teams as well in the state of New York. Pretty well-known individual within the field currently who does wonderful application work of sport and performance psychology tenets that we've read about up to this point, and especially that chapter 12 talks about. So that's why I'm showing you this right now, so you can find this YouTube link once again within the modules, watch the video, and then we're going to have a discussion board about it as well. So that's what a lot of this week's about. Now, whoa, here I am. So chapter 12. So once again, I'm in your books. It's coming right from your book. And I'm starting on page 261 with chapter 12. I'm hoping these videos will be 30 minutes or less. Again, I want to try to make these videos moving forward just simpler and easier to watch, so you all don't get bored, and use this once again as a supplementation to your reading, to going through the PowerPoints, to going through your notes as well. So chapter 12 is one of my favorite chapters because it's so applicable, or applicable, however you say that word, to performance, to whether it's exercise or sport or business or whatever. There's so many amazing skills within the field of sports psychology that can be utilized by any performer. I know I've said this before in videos. One enormous reason why I'm so passionate about this field is I believe that its tenets, that its concepts, that its theories, that its skills, that its strategies apply to any performer. That includes performing as a mother, that includes performing as a leader in business, that includes obviously being an athlete or a coach or an exerciser, you name it. That includes being a student, that includes being a teacher. And so chapter 12 provides you with some concrete examples of what some of these skills and strategies that are taught within this field are and what they look like. So starting on page 261 gives you an intro. It talks about an individual shooting a free throw. The example that they give you starting right from the get-go is a basketball player shooting a free throw, and their team is down by 2 points with like 3 seconds left. He's put on the line to tie the game to shoot his free throws. And even though he's like an 85% free throw shooter, 90% free throw shooter, he gets nervous, and so his muscles tense up, his form gets off on his shooting, and of course his ruminating and his psychology within the actual process of shooting becomes distorted, his self-confidence drops, and he misses both of his free throws. And so they give you that example just showing the importance of psychological skills. Like tactical skills or physical skills, one can acquire psychological skills. And just like the body that can be trained and practiced, the mind is the exact same way. In order to become mentally tough or mentally stronger, just like physically stronger, you need to figure out some self-awareness of where you need to get stronger, find out the skills that are pertinent for your situation, practice them, and then apply them to competition so that they can affect you for the good as a performer. So that's what a lot of this chapter is about. And again, I'm really psyched about it, no pun intended, because I think it just is such an applicable chapter for anyone performing. One very awesome key point of why psychological skills training, why is it important? So one tactic that a lot of sports psychology professionals use in working with individuals is when they get in front of individuals, whether it's athletes or coaches or businesses, they ask the group of your sport, of your performance. Let's pick baseball just as an example. Whether it's hitting a baseball, whether it's pitching, whether it's fielding a ground ball, or just the game in general. If I asked you and you had to pin a percentage on the game of what you think it is psychologically, what would that percentage be? Do you think it's 40% psychological, 60%, 70%, 85%? 90, 95%, 99% mental or psychological? The interesting thing is most coaches, most athletes, most individuals will say at least 50%, and some will say even as high as 90 or 95% mental. So of the performances that you're doing within your sport, within your event, your situation, more than 90% of it in some cases, in your opinion, is mental, requires psychology, requires cognitive abilities. And then the follow-up question is, so if 90% of your sport is mental, in your words, how much of your training are you devoting to training your mental side? And the paradox is usually zero or very, very little. And so that's where sports psychology comes into play. Just like strength and conditioning coaches or a personal trainer or even tactical coaches, sports psychology professionals like myself come in as mental strength coaches. So we're helping you gain the skills of that 90% so that you can actually use that 90% of what you think is mental rather than only 40% of it. And so then with practice and more skills and more knowledge, you're actually able to utilize the 90% of your competition, if that makes sense. And that's not always the case. That's just for an example. I mean, some sports could be less psychological and some sports could be more psychological, depending on the sport, depending on the individual. And it's really hard to measure in the first place at all. But the important point is so much of your performance is mental. So what are you doing actually to provide yourself with that skill set? And that's where chapter 12 talks about, that mental toughness, that mental edge. So now I'm going into 264 and going into 265. And so there's a lot of myths and stigma around sports psychology, psychology in general, performance psychology. And a lot of it falls under usually three categories according to your book. So on page 264 to 265, it talks about why there is stigma or negative connotation around sports psychology, especially around coaches, athletes as well, but a lot of these leaders, and especially older generational leaders. And it's number one, lack of knowledge. So they don't really know what we do. They don't really know what sport and performance psychology entails compared to clinical psychology. So their knowledge probably consists of somebody going to a therapist's office, laying on a couch, and telling this individual how you feel and just draining yourself of all your emotions. That's what a lot of people imagine with psychological training, right? When in fact it's not that at all. And even with sports psychology compared to psychology or psychiatric therapies, it's even more different. So lack of knowledge is one. They don't understand and they don't know what it entails, what the field is. Number two is misunderstandings about psychological skills. So then once they come to know that, oh, sports psychology is separate from psychology, clinical psychology, they don't know then what sports psychology entails. So some of these mental skills of focus and confidence and energy management, attention management, goal setting, they don't know these skills and that they can be taught. And so one important factor that they touch on in your book is within this misunderstandings about psychological skills is that they can be trained. So many of you athletes out there have probably been around coaches that have used phrases such as get focused or be mentally tough or place your attention here or we'll set some goals or anything else along these pop culture type of phrases or lines that many coaches use. Well, what the heck does it mean to get focused? How do you get focused? There are skills for that. What does it mean to place my attention on where it needs to be? Well, there are skills for that. How do you set effective goals? Well, there are skills for that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so being able to understand how to acquire these skills, lots of misunderstandings. And then the third reason why sport and exercise psychologists are neglected or they have this negative stigma around it is lack of time. So when you bring this wonderful empirically backed data, research, theories, real world experience to these coaches and present yourself as a sports psychology professional, they then go, oh, we don't have time to include mental training into our regimen. Sorry. We already have to watch tape. We already have to do recruiting. We already have physical practice. We already have to be in the weight room. We already have study hall. All of these things. I'm thinking about intercollegiate athletics. However, if coaches, administrators, athletes understand the saliency that is mental training, they will make time, even if it's 20 minutes twice a week. And so the lack of time is definitely an issue. However, for those that understand the importance of the mental game and actually training the mind, it shouldn't be an issue. They should make time. It's part of this holistic training regimen. What are you doing to train your bodies? What are you doing to train your minds? It's part of that. So those are some of the neglects or the stigmas around sport and exercise psychology, and even some of these myths. Now going into page 265, sports psychology is only for problem athletes. It's completely untrue. Again, just like the body, everyone should also be training the mind. Now, the problem athletes is more of the clinical side of psychology. So I don't even like that word problem, but those that experience severe anxiety or depression or bipolar disorder or schizophrenia or eating disorders or borderline personality disorder, some of these clinical actual mental illnesses, that's where that comes into play. Very few have that. That's where clinical psychology comes into play. Everyone has a mind that needs to be trained. This is where sports psychology comes into play. Some other myths is it's only for elite training, which isn't true. Even from a very young age, you can include mental training aspects. PSD provides quick fix solutions, completely untrue. Once again, we see the relationship between physical skills and mental skills. You can't just go into a weight room and expect yourself after one day to become an awesome bench presser and bench a lot of weight. You have to work up and practice, and it takes months and maybe even years. Same way with physical skills. PST is not useful, which, as we know, is completely untrue, with a lot of research that shows how useful it is and imperative it is to include mental training into your regimen. I mean, ask any elite athlete or successful elite athlete one reason why they are successful and what's included in their training regimen. And I guarantee you they'll touch on some aspect of psychology in the training of their minds. I would bet. I'll bet you $10. No, I don't want to bet you. Betting is not allowed. Never mind. So that talks about that and goes into page 267, same thing. And then it goes into, starting now on page 269, the 3 phases that exist with programming a psychological skills training regimen. So mental training, what does it look like? Well, according to your book and according to the research, there are 3 different phases that, just like strength and conditioning programs, like a periodization program with strength and conditioning, same thing with mental training. So one of the first phases is the education phase. We have to educate those that we're teaching, that we're working with, what sports psychology is all about, how it works, where is it coming from, how it's going to help them, what it looks like to actually train and practice. Second phase is the acquisition phase. So it focuses on the actual strategies and techniques for learning these psychological skills. So focus. What are some skills that are implemented to help you focus? Well, one might be to be able to become self-aware of where your attention is in that moment, mindfully being aware of where your attention is, recognizing it, and then placing it to where it needs to be. Another simple skill within that focus umbrella is being able to answer the question in the moment, what's most important now? And then once again, placing your focus or your attention where it needs to be. So finding different cues, self-awareness cues of focus to place it in that moment of where it needs to be. Just as an example of what this might look like in the acquisition phase. And then the last phase is the practice phase. So actually implementing it into practice. The ideal time period for implementing psychological skills training, just like strength and conditioning, I can't emphasize the similarities enough, is in the off season. So ideally, if I was working with a team at Miami University, if I was working with the hockey team, I would be working with them in their off season. And 2-3 times a week, I would go and I would give sessions. Just like a strength and conditioning coach, you have workout sessions. And we would go over these psychological skills training in practice during their off season. Then the hope is, just like strength and conditioning skills, physical skills, during competition, those skills will materialize and benefit one's performance. So it talks about the different phases and the importance of that. Going into page 272, it talks about who should conduct PST programs, psychological skills training programs. This is debatable. It's kind of a hot button topic within the field. From my personal opinion, and I think most professionals would agree with me, especially in higher education, qualified individuals have first and foremost an education from a credible program So that requires at least a master's degree in sport and exercise or performance psychology. Number two, they have a certification. The most well-recognized and established certification in North America is the Certified Mental Performance Consultant from the Association for Applied Sports Psychology. So the reason I mention that is because it requires a great deal of training. And when I say training, I mean graduate coursework and mentored hours of consulting, of providing mental skills training programs. So you have to have at least 400 hours of mentored hours. You have to take a plethora of graduate courses in counseling, psychology, and kinesiology. And so, in my opinion, if an individual at least doesn't have a master's degree and isn't certified, I wouldn't work with them. I would venture to guess that most of you serious athletes wouldn't work with a strength and conditioning coach that doesn't have his or her CSCS, Certified Strength and Conditioning Specialist. Because it requires knowledge, it requires experience, it requires expertise. Why wouldn't you want to work with somebody that has all those things? And once again, in our field, it's people that are educated, they have degrees, master's degree or PhD, and now they're beginning to become certified. Actual certifications, just like a strength and conditioning coach. Not all of them have it, and some of those are really, really good consultants. However, if I was a parent if I was a parent, I would help them. But if I was an individual that didn't know about sports psychology and I wanted my child to receive the best psychological training possible, I would push them for somebody that has education, possibly a PhD, and has some sort of certification. So you know they're credible. Some key points. So then it just goes on throughout your chapter of some of these technological advances within psychological skills training, developing a psychological skills training program, being able to assess athletes based off of your training program. So one awesome example is on page 276. They call it the performance profile. My challenge to you all is to do this profile. So what you do, it looks like this on page 276. Sorry, there we go. So what you're doing is you're filling out this wheel. Oops. That just went dark. Hopefully you still see me. Okay, good. You're filling out this wheel, and it has different attributes that are contributed based off empirical research, empirical data. What makes up a successful individual or a successful performer? So some of the attributes are concentration, determination, stress management, courage, leadership, commitment, mental preparation, confidence, etc., etc., etc. So you're filling out this wheel of where you think you are in each of these 10 attributes. Is it 10? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 attributes. So then you as the sports psychology professional can take this evaluation of the individual or individuals that you're working with and find out where they're currently at, and then have them fill it out again after you're done working with them. And the hope is that they're more concentrated than they were before, they're more dedicated or determined than they were before, they're more confident, etc., etc. So that's on page 276. And then it gives you some more examples of assessing athletes on 277, what you can do as both the coach or the client, the individual receiving the training, and the one giving the training. And then it has some interesting points on page 278 in relation to psychological skills training in the differences that need to become aware or brought to the forefront as the one giving the services and as the one receiving the services. And so on page 278, it says, kind of in the middle there, it compares golf and soccer. I knew there was a different sport in there. Golf and soccer. So just some differences of what you might do as a practitioner in providing mental skills training programs or a psychological skills training program for individuals in golf compared to individuals in soccer. So if you think about all the different situational factors that are different between just these two sports. So golf is a closed sport, right? And is very predictable and not time stressed. It's an individual hitting the ball at his or her pace. So in this sense, a wonderful opportunity for golfers to integrate psychological skills training is in between shots, because you have a large amount of time in between shots to think. So what are you doing thinking-wise to provide advantage to you as the performer, as the golfer, during this time period? Soccer, on the other hand, is always changing. It's more open, and there's not a lot of time to think. You're constantly moving. And so what might you do as a psychological skills training individual, the sports psychologist, to help soccer players? Wonderful things might be pregame, during PKs, during halftime, post-game, during some sort of water break or timeout, or even during the match when you're not on the ball, something very simple like a deliberate breath that can help you think more effectively, which then can help you play more effectively, emotionally and physically. So just something to take into account as a professional working with these individuals. What's the context? It's so important because the individuals playing and doing the situation or the sport or the activity can vary greatly in terms of accepting and integrating psychological skills and in terms of how those skills, mental skills, are performed and utilized. So just some examples. Designing a schedule, once again, it talks about that and the importance of doing it in the off season, just like strength and conditioning. It gives you some wonderful examples of what Olympic sports psychologists go through when training for the Olympics with athletes and coaches on page 280. And then it kind of wraps up on page, it wraps up on 282 and 283. It's important to note as you wrap up this chapter that psychological skills requires, first and foremost, buy-in, and second, practice. They just honed in on that throughout your chapter and the importance of it. And so as you go through this chapter, in chapter 12, I want you to just be cognizant of the fact of how does this domain of psychological training relate to physical training? And so my challenge to a lot of the individuals that I've worked with is, first and foremost, before we even dive into psychological skills training, to list what their program looks like as an athlete when it comes to physical training. What do? They're getting up at 5:30, they're going to the gym. There's a very strict schedule of what they're doing at the gym, very strict schedule of what they're eating, very strict schedule of recovery, and then all of the subsets that go into these categories, right? Psychological skills training is no different. You have to make time for it, and you have to include the different aspects that are needed for you to become psychologically stronger, just like physically stronger. And once somebody can buy into that and realize the efficacious nature of that, then it's much more likely that they will be able to use their mind for the good of their performance. Nowadays, luckily within at least college athletics and professional athletics, if you're not in some way training your mind utilizing sports psychology, you are behind the 8 ball and you're not going to be as competitive. I know all of you watching this video can come up with probably numerous examples of individuals and coaches who neglected the fact to train their minds. They had all the physical gifts and abilities and skills that one needs to be successful, even at a professional level. But they lack the emotional and psychological intellect or skills and abilities to sustain their performance and their success. And so the idea behind psychological skills training is to help individuals reach their potential and stay at that more often, essentially. So I'm hopeful that you found some use within chapter 12. Again, I find it very interesting. Chapter 12 is always so fun to do. If you have any questions, let me know. Until next time, God bless.